area and media hype. I mean, the president himself said on Monday the fake news media and their partner, the Democratic Party, is doing everything to inflame the coronavirus situation. So there are people out there who believe this, and they are going about their business like nothing's going on. And we have about 10, 15 seconds for you to get your message to them, for people who aren't afraid of coronavirus and think it's just politics and hype.
Well, obviously, there's been some irresponsible rhetoric, but the American people should know that President Trump has no higher priority than the health and safety and well-being of the people of this country.
Just a few minutes ago, Vice President Mike Pence was asked by Savannah Guthrie on the Today Show whether the rhetoric downplaying the threat of the coronavirus by some was appropriate. Pence went on to credit the president's efforts to fight the virus.
I will say this, though. I will say this, though. Listen, we can spend the next 2 or 3 months in the middle of this global crisis nitpicking every word. All right, I understand. It's going to be pitched politically. People are going to be covering their backsides because of how badly they handled this crisis from the very beginning. But I just will say, Willie, we have to look in every statement for a ray of hope. And in this case, when Mike Pence said there's been some irresponsible rhetoric there, we need to focus on that, just like we needed to focus last night on the fact that the President of the United States called this what it was, a global pandemic. So, again, I'm not waving a wand of absolution. I wouldn't have that power anyway. I'm just saying that I do see the vice president this morning and the president even last night, despite the many failures of that address, at least starting to take this seriously, which here's the most important thing. Here's the most important thing. Gives healthcare officials like Dr. Fauci the free rein to be as aggressive as they need to be to get testing out, to push social distancing, and to speak the truth to the American people at last.
Vice President Pence used the passive voice, said there has been some irresponsible rhetoric, but clearly he was answering a question from Savannah about the President of the United States. We don't see that very often. I guess we'll take it. But the truth is, as John Meacham talked about earlier, and you and I have been saying for a week now, you almost have to look past the president, look at the experts, look at Dr. Fauci, as you mentioned, look at the people, the scientists and the doctors who have information, the people we've had on this morning who know what they're talking about. Don't worry about the president's tweets. Stay focused on the doctors and the scientists. Let's bring in now New York Times reporter Jeremy Peters. He's out with new reporting in the Times on how right-wing pundits are covering coronavirus. Jeremy, have you seen a shift at all in the last couple of days in how some of those people who've been reckless and irresponsible with the way they've talked about it as a Democratic conspiracy and a hoax the same way the president has, have they changed their tune at all?
Not really. I think we can listen to some of the radio shows today, but as of yesterday afternoon, Rush Limbaugh was calling this basically a Chinese bioterrorism plot. This is meant to destroy President Trump's economy. It's a ploy by the Democrats and the liberal media to take him out and undermine him, to attempt to impeach him again. And this is part of the problem with where our political culture is in this country right now. Nothing is what it is. With President Trump and his supporters, there is always a political ploy. They don't see a public health crisis. They see a political crisis, and one that could be potentially damaging to the president's reelection prospects. So everybody kind of defaults into this attack mode where they attack the media, they attack the Democratic Party, they attack public health officials who are trying to say, hey, wait, we need to take this very seriously, and assume that it's all somehow meant to damage the president. I mean, just think for a second about the most vulnerable people as far as this virus is concerned. They're older, 60s, 70s. Who watches Fox News all day long? People in their 60s and 70s. It's a problem. This is not just delusion. This is dangerous. When people hear that this is all whipped up by the partisan media, there are lives that are on the line.
And that's the problem, Joe. As you know, you can't just pass it off as Rush being Rush and talking to his audience, or Hannity being Hannity and talking to his audience. They have millions and millions and millions of listeners and viewers who take what they say as gospel.
I do wonder, some of these network heads that are hearing some of the things that people are saying, either on their radio shows or on their television shows, and how they and advertisers and people that own stock in those companies aren't stepping forward and saying, hey, listen, we understand that we live in ideological times, that we live in partisan times. There have to be guardrails. And when you have hosts saying things that are just extraordinarily reckless. There was a host a couple nights ago on a Business Network that was talking about this being nothing more than a hoax, like impeachment or like the Mueller report, that people were just out to get Donald Trump. That actually, Jeremy, feeds over into Americans who go to their doctors and say it's a hoax.
Yes, that's exactly right. And you know where else it feeds, Joe? It feeds into the way that Republican politicians feel they are or are not emboldened to respond to it. I've not yet heard the...
Now that has changed, hasn't that, Jeremy, since CPAC? It seems to me when the Republicans got the news that millions of Americans could get infected by this, and they've seen their friends at CPAC already impacted by this, hasn't that changed on the Hill, at least for some Republicans?
I think for some. I think there are Republican physicians on Capitol Hill who could be doing more to say, look, this is serious. This is not political. I have heard some of that. I haven't heard quite a lot of it. I mean, the head of CPAC is self-quarantined in his home in Virginia right now and giving medical advice on television saying that the virus apparently is not very contagious because no one at CPAC that we know of is infected. Now, that may be true. Maybe people at CPAC, beyond the one individual that we know about, won't be infected. But to default to this assumption that everything is fine, what you're hearing is not really what's happening, this is all hysteria, it's not just another political game. When partisan news meets pandemic, you're in uncharted territory.
Jeremy, you know, it is interesting, Jeremy. I'm sorry, Mike, really quickly. It is interesting, Jeremy, that on Fox News in primetime, you actually have a split with hosts. Some of them suggesting that it's nothing more than a host. Others, from the beginning, taking this very seriously and actually calling out the administration and the United States government's slow response to this pandemic.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, credit where credit is due. Tucker Carlson has been more aggressive on this, as he has with other issues of Trump's policy, saying that the tax cuts, for example, have gone to the wealthy and are not benefiting the working class voters that Trump says that he's for. What Tucker has been doing over the last few days is saying, you know, taking on, not by name, but pretty implicitly, Sean Hannity and others on the network who are playing down this pandemic. I think that is remarkable.
And Michael Savage. Talk about Michael Savage and his background and his going after exactly people like Hannity and others.
Yeah, exactly. So I spoke to Michael Savage, or I've spoken to him a number of times over the course of the Trump presidency. We were emailing back and forth yesterday. And he's a scientist by training. Like, he has a PhD. And he has been out there at the forefront saying what is essentially what Rush Limbaugh and these other hosts are doing is essentially what he told me, criminal negligence. That they apparently, as far as he's concerned, don't have any social conscience because they are politicizing this, the one issue that should not be politicized.